Okay guys, so in this episode I want to focus on the history of Israel that we can find in the book of Judges and the first book of Samuel. So here you can see the map of modern Israel and her neighbors. But in biblical times, this territory was even more fragmented. As you can see, here are all the nations, all the different clans that lived in Canaan before the Hebrews started conquering this territory. So here you can see the route of the 12 spies that went into the promised land and checked out this land. And the report, however, was not very favorable. The land was nice, the land was wonderful, but the people are great and big and will never get it. That was the report of the 10 spies. So Israel had to wait another 40 years to actually enter the promised land. And they started conquering the land in the book of Joshua. And here you can see the way of the conquest. And because the land was very fragmented, it did not belong just to one nation, but many different warlords, nations. It was not an easy task to actually conquer it. And Israel didn't conquer all Israel in the beginning stages of their conquest. They conquered some territory, but not all the territory that was promised to them. And that's when we entered the age of the Judges. So on this map, each red dot shows you the location of a particular judge of whom we read in the book of Judges. Now, the term judge may be misleading understanding today's context, and it's not referring to some kind of people that are sitting in the courts and deciding who is right and wrong. The judges, however, in the Bible function more like superheroes, like local superheroes that fight the enemies of Israel. Now, some of the judges appear like they are actually having superpowers. Maybe not superpowers, but an elevated characteristic that is abnormal. And this is because the judges are selected by God and empowered by His Spirit to perform really incredible things. Now, before I will discuss the individual judges, I must say that this time in Israel is very, very turbulent. And Israel actually at this time is very divided. Some of the tribes even fight with each other at this time. And when things get really, really bad, then the people of Israel cry to the Lord when they are oppressed by the different nations that surround Israel. And then God calls a particular judge to fix the situation. So to illustrate Israel history at this time on a graph, it would look something like this. So the Israelites depart from God, they start following false gods. The situation gets really dire because God judges them with foreign nations, and then they cry out to God. God responds by raising a judge who fights Israel's enemies. The situation gets better. It doesn't take long, however, for Israel to depart again from God, and the whole cycle is repeated. So the first judge we read about is Othniel, Caleb's younger brother. Just to remind you, Caleb was one of the 2 spies who said that it is okay to enter the promised land, but the majority of Israel did not listen to him. So now Caleb's younger brother, Othniel, is called by God to deliver them from the nation of Aram. The king of Aram is defeated and Israel enjoys peace for 40 years. Now, if you look at this map, you will not see the kingdom of Aram. We see this nation, however, in later times, for example, when Saul is the king of Israel. We do, however, see on this map the nation of the Amorites, and many biblical scholars would argue that the later kingdom of Aram is closely related to these nations of the Amorites. So when we read in the Bible that Othniel delivered Israel from the king of Aram, it's probably referring to the nation of Amorites. But let's continue. The next judge mentioned in the book of Judges is the judge by the name of Ehud. So the area of operation of this particular judge is next to the city of Jericho, very close to the Dead Sea. The reason I mention Jericho is because in the Bible we read that Eglon of Moab took control of the city of palms, and that's identified as Jericho. And this is a very ancient tradition because even today when you visit this area, you will see hundreds of palms that are located and planted in this area next to the Dead Sea. And if we look at our map again, The nation that is mentioned here is the nation of Moab, but also there are other nations that are mentioned, the Amorites and even the Amalekites that joined the king of Moab. Now, the Bible provides us with several interesting details that make this story even more interesting. So, the first thing we read is that Ehud was left-handed, and that the king of Moab, Eglon, was a really fat person. The Hebrew Bible mentions people being left-handed only 3 times. The first time is this account, the book of Judges and Ehud. Then we have the 700 Benjamites that were left-handed and really skillful in slingshotting. And lastly, we read in 1 Chronicles about soldiers that joined David at Ziklag that were also left-handed. Now, the first thing that connects all those 3 accounts is that the people that are left-handed are all from the tribe of Benjamin. And this is even more surprising if we analyze the meaning of the word Benjamin, because Benjamin means, translating from Hebrew, son of my right hand. So, if you are a Hebrew reader and you read this text, this detail really stands out because you read that somebody is from the tribe of Benjamin, which means son of the right hand, and yet his quality is that he is left-handed. So immediately your attention on this detail should be greater. And now, when we read this story of this assassination mission by Ehud, we start to understand why the writer of Judges is emphasizing so hard that Ehud is left-handed. The quality, the feature of being left-handed did in some instances give you advantages. For example, hiding a weapon. Because somebody would expect a weapon in a certain place if you are right-handed, but if somebody is left-handed, he would have the weapon in a different space. And that's why perhaps it was much easier for Ehud to hide his weapon that he used to assassinate Eglon. And then we have the second detail that is also important to the story, that the king of Moab was a really fat person. And this comes important when the assassination happens, that Ehud, when he strikes Eglon in the stomach, he's so fat that when that happens, the sword, the little sword that Ehud used, is in a way absorbed, swollen by the fat around Eglon's belly. So the weapon is hidden, and it is much harder to determine the cause of death of Eglon when they finally find him. Perhaps this gave enough time for Ehud to mobilize his army that later on attacked Moab and actually took control of all the territories that Moab controlled at that time, giving Israel another 80 years of peace. Okay, but let's move on to our next judge, and this one is also very interesting. So the third one on our list is the judge called Shamgar. And with Shamgar, we have more questions than answers actually. And that's because there is very little information about Shamgar given in the Bible. And what might surprise you is that Shamgar was probably not an Israelite, and he was not probably a judge of Israel. Because the Bible doesn't say actually that he was a judge. It just says that he saved Israel. So, if Shamgar wasn't an Israelite, who was he? Well, if you look at this map, I place Shamgar next to the city of Beth Anath. And that's because we read that Shamgar was the son of Anath. Anat was a Canaanite and Egyptian deity of love and war. And it's funny that you have love and war in the same sentence. And although not as famous as other Canaanite gods in the Bible, Anath was quite an important deity in Canaan at the time of the Judges. The Bible tells us that Beth Anath was one of the fenced cities that fell to the tribe of Naphtali, but it was not taken initially by the Israelites and was still controlled by the Canaanites. The second clue that Shamgar was probably not an Israelite is his name. First of all, you will not find anybody else with this name in the Bible, and if it was a Hebrew name, probably it would be used several times, but it turns out this name is of Hurrian origin. Toward the end of the Middle Bronze Age, there was an influx of Hurrian culture into Canaan. So that's about 100 years before the Israelites came to Canaan. The Bible tells us that Shamgar killed 600 Philistines using an ox goad. An ox goad was used by farmers to discipline ox. So it's quite remarkable that probably a farmer killed 600 Philistines with a tool used to discipline ox. Okay, but let's move on. Next on our list is the judge called Deborah, and it's a woman. Here you can see the approximate location of the judge Deborah. And even though Deborah would reside at the border of Ephraim and Benjamin, so about here, the main events happen actually closer to the Sea of Galilee because we read of Mount Tabor and the Kishon River. So the military strategy was that Barak would take armies from the tribes of Naphtali and Zebulun and go up to Mount Tabor, which is located here. But actually, the story starts even further to the north, in the city of Kadesh, which is located here. And if we look once again at the tribal distribution of land, this is the territory of the tribe of Zebulun and Naphtali. So no wonder that armies from those two tribes were summoned. So Deborah meets Barak in his hometown called Kadesh, and together with the army from the tribe of Naphtali and Zebulun, they get ready to attack their enemies on Mount Tabor. Now, Mount Tabor, is a pretty neat spot to wait for your enemies. It's a kind of like round shape mountain. But what makes this mountain even more important strategically is that around you, if you are on top of this mountain, you have just a valley, so you can see everything that is around you. And if you are a commander, this is the place where you want to be if you are about to fight a battle. And so the mighty army of Jabin from Hazor, with their mighty chariots, assembled in the valley of Jezreel, but then they were attacked and they lost the battle. The commander of Jabin's army, Sisera, fled as far as Haroseph Hagoyim, and there he was killed by Yael. What is also interesting is that in the 5th chapter we have the so-called Song of Deborah, and in this song Deborah says that the mighty chariots of Jabin were flooded by the Kishon River, which you can see here on this map. Now what is cool about this is that this particular story is read together with the parasha, the Torah reading for a particular week that describes the flooding of the mighty chariots of Pharaoh. So it's a nice thing to know that the Jewish people read this particular story with the story of the flooding of the chariots of Pharaoh. Now, to give you an understanding, the Kishon River is a really small river. You can see it here on this video. And really, if you look at it every day, it doesn't look like a dangerous river. So you even have cows that are crossing this river here in this video. But this river can indeed flood. And sometimes in Israel's history, even the modern history, this river has caused some problems and flooded some of the fields and even the roads that are nearby. So even though sometimes the biblical story may seem as an exaggeration, but actually it's quite possible that it did happen, that there was a flooding of this river. The story of our next judge also begins in the Jezreel Valley, and that's the story of Gideon, a very famous judge with a fascinating story full of twists and turns. We find Gideon in the village of Ophrah, which is located probably somewhere around today's town of Afula. Now, when we meet Gideon, he is in a pretty miserable state. He is threshing wheat in a winepress and hiding from the Midianites. And to understand what is happening, let's zoom in again on the Jezreel Valley. You see the Jezreel Valley is colored here in the green color. And because of the raids by the Midianites, the Israelites are actually living in the mountains, in the hills, hiding from the danger. And only when it is safe, they are going down to the valley. So you can see in the blue color, those are the mountains around the Jezreel Valley. And this is where the Israelites hide. So the Israelites go down to the valley, do the farming as much as they can, but then quickly go up and hide to the mountains, to hide from the danger from the Midianites that come, that spoil everything, that take everything that is farmed and go away. And this is a big problem for the Israelites. So we showed the map of the different nations, different tribes that lived in the land before the conquest, but this is a new fraction that attacks Israel. So here in the green color, you can see the territories conquered by the Israelites during the time of Joshua, and now as we talk about the book of Judges. So the Israelites did not conquer all the territories, and they had problems with local nations that were still living in the land. There were still cities that were not conquered, but now there is a new danger, and that's the Midianites. So you could say that the family of Moses, because Moses got a wife from the Midianites, is now attacking the Israelites. And they're coming with their camels, taking everything they can, taking all the goods and just going away. So it's very, very destructive for the Israelites. So this is the background of the calling of Gideon. And if we read the story, we learn that Gideon is from the Abrazites clan, which is part of the tribe of Manasseh. And here on this map, you can see where the tribe of Manasseh would be located if they would conquer all the territory. But of course, remember that the Israelites did not conquer all the territories that were promised to them by God. So here actually you can see the two tribes of Manasseh, so the West Manasseh and the East Manasseh. But the territory that most interests us is like on the border with the tribe of Manasseh, Zebulun, Naphtali, and actually those tribes will be called by Gideon to enter the fight with the Midianites. So skipping the whole dialogue with God and testing and different things that Gideon does, this is a longer topic and it's for another video. But eventually Gideon gathers his army, and the first place they go is this spring, the Harold Spring, where another selection of his army is made. Now, the cool thing about Israel is that you can actually visit the biblical sites of the stories that you read in the Bible. And you can go and visit the place where this famous spring, where another test of Gideon's soldiers took place. And today it's a nice national park. People also camp there. And it's a really wonderful place to just spend time with your family. But this spring still exists today. The same spring that gave water to the soldiers of Gideon is active today. So this is quite remarkable. Gideon's army is reduced to only 300 men. We learn in the Bible that God wants this army to be small so that there would be no question as to who is the winner, who is the victorious winner of this battle. God is teaching Gideon, if you trust me, it doesn't matter how mighty you are. You can still win if you have me on your side. And so, as the Midianites and Amalekites were sleeping, Gideon and his 300 men attacked the camp, shouting, blowing the trumpet, and smashing the pottery. Additionally, God sent a spirit of terror and confusion on the Midianites, and they started killing themselves. When they realized that the battle is lost, they started escaping. Gideon and his 300 men chased the Midian forces as far as Karkor. They were also joined by the tribe of Ephraim that blocked the way south for the Midian armies. Eventually, the two Midianite kings were caught and killed by Gideon. And here we'll do a break in our history of Israel using the maps. This is a new project I am creating. I hope you like this. I hope you like the way I present history. using the maps. There is still more interesting stories coming, so stay tuned. In my next episode, we will cover the rest of the Judges, and then we'll move on to the first kings of Israel, also using the same format, using the maps. So there is still a lot of interesting stories for us to explore together. So it's very important, if you want to be notified when the new episode will come out, to subscribe to the channel, to hit that bell button, and that way you won't miss a new episode when it comes out. So please subscribe to the channel. Also, thank you so much for everybody who's supporting the channel using Patreon, using PayPal, or even becoming a member on YouTube. I am so grateful to all of you that support the channel. Your support really helps me to keep on, to be creative, explore new tools that I can use to teach the Bible, teach the history of Israel. I am now working on a really cool thing. I'm working on a new map of Israel that will be totally 3D. So I hope that in the coming months I'll have that tool, and that way I can also use it for teaching. So if you would like to support me, to support the work, the best way to do it is through Patreon and PayPal. So I'm leaving a link in the description, but you can also become a member of YouTube if you feel more comfortable with that. Any help is greatly appreciated. So thank you everybody for even the smallest donations. This is really a blessing to me. On my Patreon page, I also will have a lot of assets that will be available to you to purchase. So I'm actually gonna be setting up a store where you will have access to many renders that I'm doing, the 3D stuff, and also the maps. So make sure you check it out. And as always, I wish you all the best. Have a great day, and shalom.